Yep, I believe we are live. All right,
Good.
welcome everybody. We're live today. This is July 31st, 2025. This is the Space Water Podcast where we dive into the sound of the light. And of course, my name is Castaldo. And today we have a very special guest. I just got to know this man a little bit a couple of weeks ago. And it's my pleasure and it's an honor to have him here. From what his bio says, he's also an independent software designer and he's also been writing about the Dogon and ancient writings ever since the 90s. And he has well over a dozen books, I think, on the topics. And it's going to be an amazing conversation. I know right off the jump, it's going to be a pleasure to speak with this man. Everybody, welcome, I hope, for the first of hopefully several times on the Space Water Podcast, Mr. Laird Scranton.
Great. Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Thank you. I pleasure. I really um, I'm really interested in seeing where this goes into. I didn't plan too many questions or anything like that because I wanted it to be sort of, really, really pure and see where it goes. But just I don't listen to many podcasts and stuff out there because I try to keep my work original.
Right.
But when I saw you on Facebook the other day, because you were recommended to me by my friend Maria Wheatley and Glenn Kreisberg. So when I saw
Yes.
you on Facebook, I got a really good feeling about you. And then I looked up one of your podcasts recently, and I was like, "Oh man, I really want to talk to this man." I was very interested, and we have so many interests that are the same as well. And I think that there's gonna be a lot of things. I think people are gonna be amazed by the way we can actually blend probably some of the things that we know
Yeah.
and things like that. It's gonna be fun. So, what first got you? I heard a podcast this morning that said that it got you into it. Your wife was reading a book in the '90s. That first.
Yeah, she read a book called Unexplained by Jerome Clark, where every chapter in the book was about some mystery in the world that hadn't been solved. And one of the chapters was about this little African tribe called the Dogon, a modern day tribe, who knew some things about facts about astronomy that they really shouldn't know without technology. And so I thought, well, looking into this is really interesting. This is gonna wherever this goes is gonna be interesting. Let's see where this leads. And it led to 15 books. So it's a pretty deep subject. I know just from our conversations together that there is a large overlap in the way you look at things and the way I look at things. So that should make this interesting.
Yeah, really. I mean, and the thing is, I haven't gone that deep into the Dogon.
That's okay. I'm happy to explain.
That's why I wanted to have you on because I want to learn. Yeah. Yeah, so like in the Doga, I did read the series Mystery by Robert Temple. I got to meet him a little bit through my friend Professor Chandra, and so I know from that book a little bit about it. But do they do typically what a lot of cultures do, and even nowadays we tend to make gods like patriarchal type of father figures out of gods. Do they do that in the Dogon culture too, or is it?
Well, the Dogon, okay, there are about 300,000 Dogon tribe members. They live in Mali, in the south of Mali, in the desert, along an escarpment, a bunch of cliffs. And it's a priestly tribe, and their societal mission is to preserve original forms of symbolism. And their references go way, way, way back. They have connections that go back as far that arguably go back as far as Göbekli Tepe around 9,000 BC. And their society is like a precursor to a lot of the classic religious traditions. They have civic practices and cosmological words that are a match for ancient Egypt. They have ritual practices that are a match for Judaism. They have symbolic elements that are a direct match for Hinduism, even though you wouldn't know by looking at the culture that they were. You wouldn't say they were Hindus. They have practices that are in complete agreement with Buddhism. They have things in common with Kabbalism. And as it turns out, it's a really fortuitous place to start a comparative study between traditions. If I had a perfect knowledge, I would have picked this group because they sit right at the center of a bunch of stuff.
Well, I know when nowadays when you use the word Aryan, people tend to view it the wrong way, but do you think they were influenced by like Aryan Vedic Sanskrit as well?
Well, I think that the tradition originates in the Fertile Crescent, which is up near the where the Aryan people were. I wouldn't describe it at all as an Aryan tradition. This is a Black African tradition, and very rooted in everything we think of as being ancient Egyptian. Uh, their language that they have in common with other North African and West African tribes. This is a thoroughly African group, but they preserve myths and symbols and symbolic themes and words and all sorts of things that are just Jung's archetypes. These are
Yeah.
the core references.
Yeah, well, I think this is a good discussion right here where we should stop for a minute because I think a lot of people confuse when I use the word Aryan that I mean white. Um,
Right. Right.
Aryan to
I
me,
know there are researchers who are invested in the idea that the symbolic tradition came out of the Aryan region of the world and migrated from there elsewhere.
because
Um,
Vedic, like Egyptian, Persians, Hindu, all of that is influenced by Aryan, stems from the Asura and Deva tribes. I mean, the word
right,
Osiris comes from
but
Asar.
the thing is, as Jung found out, you have signature symbols here in this as the archetypes that are found everywhere. And back in the 1800s, there were researchers. It was popular for a researcher to pick one location and postulate, okay, this is the source of all the others, and then they
Yeah,
would start to try to trace it. And eventually, they'd end up bumping into some contradiction that says that their perspective can't be right. So, really, I think that that's sort of a fool's errand to try to trace it that way, because what the traditions themselves are telling us is that in ancient times, a very knowledgeable group of teachers developed a civilizing plan for humanity, very closely linked to a symbolic cosmology, and they made an effort to instruct that globally to many, many different groups. So it'd be as if you and I had the same math teacher in high school, but decades apart from each other. And we meet at a party and we start talking about um, math, and we realize, hey, we know all the same little math word problems and all the little tricks to use with the numbers and all the little diagrams we have in common, but not because I got it from you or you got it from me, but because we both
yeah.
learned from the same teacher.
It's sort of like a universal symbolism, you know.
Right. I mean, it's universal only because somebody made the effort to teach it everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Actually, what they did, according to the Dogon, is they would take 8 tribe members from a given tribal group and transport them to a remote location
mm.
and instruct them there, and then bring them back and let them pass that instruction on to their compatriots. And that's also one of Jung's archetypes of the 8 bringers of civilizing skills that you have, everywhere,
And would they teach it through like song and ritual
through all
practice?
sorts of things. I mean, these were imagine the best teacher you ever had and all the different techniques that a good teacher uses, and they were using all of those. One of my books is called Primal Wisdom of the Ancients, and the focus of the book is on all the specific techniques you can point to that were being used to instruct this stuff that we associate with the very best teachers. A teacher will try to shortcut um, the way of communicating an idea to a person. That if I know that you understand what hot is and I'm trying to teach you about cold, and I tell you cold is the opposite of hot, that immediately puts you in the mindset of what I'm talking about. Or if you understand what A is and I'm trying to teach you B, and I can tell you B is almost exactly the same, almost identical to A, you now are immediately put in an understanding of what it is with almost no effort on your part. They were using those kinds of techniques, mnemonic techniques. When our kids were little, we wanted to take them out to a county fair, and we were afraid about what happens if we got separated from our child. How would they find us again? Because they were
Yeah.
too young to know their name and address. So we taught them to sing their name and address to children's tunes. When they were asked, where do you live? They would sing a little song that was their address. And when they were asked, what's your phone number? They would sing a little song that gave their phone number. These are techniques of instructing a person that are very easy to understand and very easy to remember. We have friends who 30 years later, heard the songs. We had a friend who wanted to send us a package, and she said, I was going to look up your address, but I realized I knew it from the song.
Yeah, it's so amazing, and it goes to the simplest things and the most complex things. Like I even like the Orpheus mysteries,
Right,
where they were using like transmigration of the soul and transcendence of the soul, but they were doing these instructions in poem and verse and music form,
right.
and
And so, I mean, it begins with dance, and it begins with drumming,
yeah,
and all sorts of different techniques to try to get the ideas across.
some of
Um,
those tribal drums have incredible symbolism on the
yeah,
actual drum itself.
yeah. Actually, I mean, Tibetan drums are very symbolic. Lots of the Dogon drums
Yeah,
also lots of symbolism, and the costumes they wear when they are drumming and when they're dancing. Um, but whoever these teachers were, they were using every possible technique to try to communicate an idea and try to get it to survive, because the goal was this is technical information they were trying to convey. What they're talking about is how creational energy works scientifically, but they were trying to communicate it to a technological audience which they knew wouldn't exist for thousands of years. So they had to find a way to present it so that a non-technical audience, an audience that had not been educated in all these subjects, would be able to correctly carry it forward long enough for groups like us to recognize it. So I look at a drawing the Dogon do, and I immediately say, oh, I understand what that is. That's the shape of an electron orbit. But the people, the initiates who were passing us along down through the generations, didn't have a clear idea of what it represented, or didn't always have a clear idea of what it represented. These are called, Buddhism calls them adequate symbols. Symbols, these are shapes that can be observed in nature, and so ultimately can't lose their meaning. When you see the shape, a person will understand what they're talking about.
yeah, it's incredible. I'm going through the same thing nowadays with certain knowledge that a lot of the writers said it was primitive belief systems and all this, but it's like a universal cosmic language of symbols that you can't deny.
Right. Now, the Dogen say their teachers had two goals. The first goal was to help humanity, help mankind understand our real relationship to the larger processes of
Mm,
creation. So we know where we stand in relation to everything else. The second goal was to instill in us a skill for discriminating knowledge. That's the ability to basically to take a set of facts and draw inferences from it, because the inferences are where the power is. That's where the leaps in knowledge happen. To be able to take a set of five facts and say, okay, if I know these five things, such and such has got to be true. And so that's the whole dynamic between the instructor and the student. And they teach people one person on a time, one instructor, one student. The student is expected to come up with the next question to ask the instructor. They're supposed to be able to assimilate what they've already learned and figure out what the next question should be.
Yeah, teaching is an art in itself. One of the hardest things to do as a human being is to teach. It's an art. I know, having a child myself. Just the way if you make it look like it's teaching too, it's difficult. You have to almost have to make it fun. Make it
Yeah,
make it
because children are sponges. Their impulse is to absorb everything. And so if you present it in a way that's fun for them, they're going
Yeah,
to soak it up faster than you can deliver it.
yeah, that's so true. Yeah, teaching's not hard when the person's interested.
Right,
Like,
right. And that's the problem with schools these days is
yeah,
very early on they've lost the interest of the kids they're trying to teach.
and they're forcing kids to memorize things they really shouldn't try to memorize before they can understand it.
Right. And memorization is not really the way to go. The goal is understanding. If they understand it, they don't have to memorize it.
Yeah, I remember just being in school, like, Lord, I would literally wake up from a nightmare worrying about certain things that I had to remember, like facts that
Al-
you don't need.
Also, just to correct my name's pronounced Laird. It has with
Laird,
air right in the middle of it. Nobody ever gets it right, so don't have to feel bad about it. I have a list
I
of
was
as
I
long as my arm of names I get called by people, because Laird, nobody recognizes Laird as a name.
Laird, I actually originally said your name this way. a couple of weeks ago until I saw a friggin' podcast and saw them pronounce it right.
Somebody got it wrong, and I probably didn't correct them. But
Yeah, you didn't incorrect. Maybe I didn't watch it long enough for you to actually correct them.
well,
But
sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. It just depends on the tenor of the discussion.
it's
It
spelt Laird.
really doesn't matter. Everybody calls me Laird.
It's spelt Laird.
Yeah, I joke that with a name like Laird, it's hard to have a nickname. You can What are you going to call me? La.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't really like my name either, but
That's okay.
but I actually was calling you Laird because it's spelt that way. But then I saw other
Yeah.
people pronounce it, and I went with the crowd, which I don't usually do in life.
That's okay. No problem at all. My
I
wife and
feel
I have that in
sorry.
common. Her name is Risa, Risa, and everybody gets it wrong every time. So
Yeah.
we expect it.
Well, my mom's name was Gina
Oh,
with two N's.
right,
Everybody called her Gina first
right,
time when
yeah.
they see it. Gina. She's like, it's
And
not Gina, it's Gina.
this is a trick for parents trying to pick a name is what kind of a name can I give my child that everybody won't constantly misspell or get wrong, you know?
Yeah. And it's true because when you misspell or mispronounce something, you do change.
Right.
You
But
change it.
you all that having that in common with my wife was actually a good thing. I mean, provided us with a common experience that affected the kind of person we are. I bet
Yeah.
people approach my name Laird the same way a dog approaches a porcupine. Has no idea what is
Yeah.
this thing. You know?
You know what? I should have asked right off the jump and not assumed.
No,
It's
no, that's no problem at all.
my fault. I really apologize for that.
No, no, I'm easy. I said I get called Blair, Blaine, Lars, Leonard, all sorts of different names.
What type of music do you compose music you mentioned to
Yeah.
me.
When my wife first met me, I was a singer-songwriter. I
How
write,
did you guys first meet actually? Before you get into the
um,
music thing. I'd
we
like to
were,
know.
I was one of the early male co-eds at Vassar College, which was the initial women's college in the country. On a sort of they had aspired to the scale of Yale or Harvard.
Yeah, wow.
And so my wife was also went there. I was actually singing with her best friend, and one day at dinner, her best friend said to me, was telling me about her friend Risa, who just had a bad breakup and was depressed. I said, if she was that depressed, why didn't you invite her to dinner? And so she went back to the dormitory and invited her to come here to sing the next time we sang. And so we met as I was performing someplace.
Wow.
So,
That's great. That's amazing. And
I write, um, you know, 60s, 70s style folk rock music.
oh, cool. Very cool.
Hmm.
Yeah, I write kind of hard rock music, but I'm influenced by so much from
Yeah, I'm
blues.
influenced by a lot too. I was
Yeah.
played in a band. We were doing sort of British uh, folk music, Pentangela-ish music. I don't know if you're familiar with that group or
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Traffic. If you're familiar with
Yes, I
the
know
jazz
Traffic.
group Traffic, where we played some of their songs.
Did you ever get into like the psychedelic English, like Sid Barrett
No,
and
no,
stuff
I
like
never
that?
did that. That I grew up in Salem, Oregon, and psychedelic was about as far removed from the experience in Salem, Oregon. Then I went to high school in Portland, which was quite a bit more hip. Um,
Yeah,
at one point, a couple of years ago, I was interviewed by the Wu-Tang Clan, if you know who they are.
I
This
do
is
know them. I've met a couple of people like Killer Priest
Yeah.
and
So I congratulated them on finding the oldest, whitest, least hip guy in the country to interview.
that's so funny. How did that's cool. Yeah, you know what? Killer Priest and a few of them guys are into conspiracies and ancient mysteries and a
Yeah,
lot of them.
absolutely, and very knowledgeable about it. Very interesting to talk to them.
Yeah,
Did did a couple of interviews with them.
yeah, they're one of the only artists that I know in rap that incorporate some of that knowledge into their lyrics.
Right. Yep. No, they're very interesting guys.
Yeah, the one guy, Genius or the Jizza, I think they call him.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he has a way of incorporating like cosmologies
Yep.
into
That
his.
that that's really interesting when people can cross between art forms and
Yeah, yeah. Well, this morning, I think it was this morning, you posted on Facebook a picture that of a topic I'm very interested in. Maybe we could talk about it a little bit, and then I think it'll flow into the Gobekli Tepe that we talked about.
Yeah,
You posted about the Bethel and the Betlos or
right,
Betlos.
right. Yes,
Very interesting word, very
yes,
interesting topic. And for
yes,
those that want to know, this is the picture. If you guys can see it here,
right.
that's the picture that we were talking about of one of the coins.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the coin of the Emperor Elagabalus.
I'm not sure which coin it is, but the image that's on the coin is very, very close to the logo of the college I went to.
Wow. Ooh,
I actually, as a comment on that thread, I posted the logo of the college. So, and instead of it being the ovoid stone in the middle of the picture, it's a woman who represents knowledge, and she's holding the icon, one of the icons of Asherah from the Canaanite era. It's a tree.
interesting. Interesting. Yeah. So a lot
Yeah,
of
and
the
the college is called Vassar College, which is a German word for water, which is the Dogons say that water is our objective pattern for how creational energy works.
that's very interesting.
And if you
Did
know what water does, you can predict what energy will do.
yeah, water is an amazing life. I mean, oh man, water is a portal too, in my opinion.
Hmm.
You know, it's just it's incredible. And the fact that space has kind of water as well. That's like
Right,
the
it is. Yeah, definitely.
you know,
Um, okay, now we were starting to talk about Gobekli Tepe. In this symbolic tradition, there's only one subject that they talk about ever. Everything they talk about relates to it. They're talking about how two energies, okay, first of all, from the very start, it's always presented as objective science, not as religion. From the very start, they're saying, by the way, folks, this is actually science. And my one of my purposes with my books has been to demonstrate how that's true. So the subject is how two energies, which boil down to magnetism and electricity come together to create material forms. How does energy materialize? And the Dogons say that one set of dynamics of energy create matter. The same cluster of dynamics of energy form the universe. It creates biological life and it creates consciousness, all the same dynamics of energy. So if you understand it in any of those contexts, you've taken a giant step towards understanding all of the other symbolic themes. Now, to underscore that idea, what the Dogon do and the Egyptians did is they laid out one long progression of the stages of these energies, simultaneously describing all four of those creational themes using one set of symbols, one progression of symbols, so that every symbol carries meaning for all four themes, which is why the symbolism gets so complicated. That if we're talking about the shape of a hemisphere, in the context of how matter forms, that represents the expansion of mass. If we're talking about biological life, it represents the expanding womb of a woman who's pregnant. So every symbol works that way. They all carry meanings that apply to all of those themes. And so you can't really honestly, you can't truthfully ask, what does a symbol represent? You have to ask, what does it represent if we're talking about um, consciousness, or what does it represent if we're talking about matter? And it'll be parallel ideas. My daughter studies um, yoga, and yoga is a companion philosophy to the very early cosmology called Samkhya that all of the Indian systems rest on. I think the Dogon system and Egyptian systems rest on it too. But the yoga and Samkhya are so parallel with each other that my daughter could start describing a concept to me and tell me what term she was talking about, and I could finish her sentence for her because I understood the same term from the perspective of the cosmology, not from the perspective of yoga.
yeah, that's interesting. You know, a lot of ancient cosmologies and even ancient gods, they have tetrads.
Right.
right? With
Mhm.
like them forming like but they tend to throw human characteristics to them, make them mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers.
Right.
You know,
Right. I mean, okay, what they're doing, what the ancients were doing is if you want to symbolize a discrete concept, you can do that by relating it to a familiar object or a familiar animal. For example, when they wanted to represent the idea of vibration, the animal they chose was a rabbit, which twitches all the time. Its mode of living is vibration. So, but when it comes to discussing processes of energy, you can't discrete objects don't work to do that. So what they did instead was they would anthropomorphize the concepts to make them into characters, and then create a storyline where the actions of the characters are doing what energy does when it interacts.
yeah, that's like that to me is how mythology was born.
Right, right. That's exactly. And with the Dogon have versions of very important myths, very key myths. Go down comes down to, the Garden of Eden myth and the myth of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods in Greece. Um, the Noah's Ark myth, the myth that opens the book of Genesis about we don't get the full story in Genesis, but the myth is about uh, a goddess who sleeps just below the surface of the water. And the first glow of light in the morning that precedes the dawn
Oh my God.
causes her to open her eyes and perceive the light.
You know what that sounds like to me?
What's that?
So on because I'm into I've spent a long time in plasma physics. So on the night side, the magnetotail stretches out
Right,
like a dragon almost, or like a teardrop,
right,
and it steals some of the light. And in Vedic they talk about how Vitra steals the cattles of Indra,
right, right.
steals the
Yeah,
light of Indra,
yep,
right? And it's literally the goddess stealing the light, and right before dawn is where
yep,
all that happens. The
yep,
magic.
absolutely. You were talking about a serpent or a dragon being a symbol.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that. The reason is that when you get to a certain level with creational energy, when you get to the level of the formation of an electron or the formation of a hydrogen atom is governed by two oscillations of energy. And back in 1927, one of the top physicists, a French physicist named Louis de Broglie, wrote a seminal paper. He realized that the key aspects of these oscillations comes about through resonance. That the stable orbits for an electron and a hydrogen atom are the points of resonance for the two oscillations. Now, one of those oscillations is ultra quick. It moves back and forth. It's a true oscillation. It's purely magnetic. And the other one is a linear motion that's induced by the magnetism. And it's the interaction of those two oscillations that produce everything. So a serpent, the other day asked Google's AI to describe the motion of a serpent to me, and it came back and it said a serpent's motion combines two oscillations, one that's oscillating and the back and forth, and the other one that moves linearly.
It gave you the answer you were looking for.
Yeah, it gave me very specifically the answer I was looking for. This happens all the time. I use
Wow.
Google's AI to ballpark justify a certain perspective. If I think that something might be true, I'll ask Google's AI, could that be true? Explain to me, how does this work in layman's term? Einstein said that if you can't explain an idea in terms that a 6-year-old would understand, you don't understand it.
Oh, that's 100% true. It's true. That's the hardest thing to do nowadays, especially if you want to get into a hard subject. The average person who's going to sit there and read mathematical formulas and things like this.
Right, right,
You know,
right.
you
And
have to be able to break it down. Like, show me like it's like tying my shoes.
well, see, the Dogon system does what Einstein does. Einstein was not really a mathematician himself, not a top mathematician. He used qualitative observations to figure out what must be going on, and then employed mathematicians to verify it mathematically for him. Well, the Dogon do essentially the same thing. They get us from a domain where of pure energy to one where things like atoms exist, using no geometrical figure that's more complicated than a circle, a square, or a triangle, and no mathematical value that's more complicated than 3.2 as an approximation of pi. And what they do instead is they try to familiarize us with what the basic dynamics and interactions are of these energies, and then they build on that. Once you understand that magnetism moves circularly and electricity tries to move linearly, that's a foundational starting point, and you build on that forward to figure out now what are the energies doing. And it's the same dynamics no matter what scale you look at it on. So if you look at it on a very simple dimensional scale, all of the dynamics simplify. If you look on it on a more complicated scale, like a scale of stars and planets, then you get a lot more nuance as to what the interactions are doing. But it's all the same thing. So we get into the quantum domain where we can't directly observe what's happening. We don't have to. We already understand how these dynamics work on all sorts of other scales. It has to work the same way on the quantum scale.
Yeah, that's so amazing. It's beautiful too. Very beautiful.
Yeah.
When you started to write books on these topics, did you start to experience a deeper, like a spiritual belief in things, or did you keep it, or just strictly like from a science? Because I feel like those two need to be merged.
Well, they do. In the end, they're the same thing. Um, at age 18, I would have described myself as the least spiritually connected person I knew. This was back in the Vietnam War days, and I was under the immediate threat of being drafted to go to Vietnam. I had a very low draft lottery number, and I was going to Vietnam.
Oh,
But I had had a high school teacher who had the foresight to bring attorneys in to talk to us about conscientious objection. And so I understood what the right things were to do to apply for conscientious objector status. But in Oregon, where I grew up, you could apply on religious grounds, which I couldn't do because I didn't have a foundation in religion, or you could apply on moral grounds, which I ended up doing, even though nobody had ever been granted conscientious objector status on moral grounds. In the end, I was. But that's how disconnected from religion I was when I started this. I say that the first thing that a person in my field of study learns is that there are things going on in the world that we don't understand yet. And everything that you call paranormal and everything that you call spiritual falls in that category of things that we don't yet understand why they come about, but that we don't necessarily have to deify just because we don't understand them. You don't have to presume it's God.
true.
In the Dogon system, when we move from energy to atoms, there the space in which you could imagine a god having worked shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks to the point that the only real action that they attribute to a godlike mythological character, and they don't even deify that character, is how it is that the two poles of a magnet are held together. And in the end, they actually explain that scientifically too, but it takes effort to get to what the rationale is. But this is presented as science. The Dogon had the wherewithal to ask their teachers, "Are you God?" And their teachers said, "No, we're not God, but if it helps you to think of us as agents of God, that's okay."
Does any of their belief system fall along with biblical, like some kind of angelic beings that came down and taught mathematics and cosmetics and
Yeah, let me try to explain what that is. Okay, I know you'll understand because you're into discussing, you studied plasma. Okay, the orbs that we were seeing so prolifically over New Jersey and other places around the world, hundreds of them up there. The authorities were, to my point of view, were trying to disguise those orbs. They were trying to distract us from them by sending up every
drones
drone
and
device known to mankind And so they managed to convince the media every time they saw the orbs to say drones, not orbs, energetic orbs. In the ancient traditions for the Dogon and for the Egyptians and for the Buddhists, those are living creatures, living consciousnesses that in the ancient mindset, plasma is the root form of consciousness. And
Yeah.
those are plasma orbs. The Egyptians called them Aku orbs. And the concept of an Aku orb exists on all sorts of different scales. An electron is an Aku orb, but on a larger scale, our sun and the two Sirius stars are Aku orbs.
Yeah.
Dogon used the same term, but over thousands of years, the word has morphed a little bit. They pronounce it Ogo, O-G-O. And the Dogons say there are three classes of Ogo orbs. They serve as messengers between levels of consciousness that are Hindu-like levels of consciousness. What happens is energy naturally moves between two states. It moves from each of the two energies trying to be dominant. On one end of the scale, it's magnetism that's dominant, and the other end, it's electricity, and the other energy is dormant. That continuum of energy self-differentiates into domains the same way that deep seawater in the ocean self-differentiates into biological zones. The type of life you have living just below the surface of the water is very different than the type of life you have at the bottom of the ocean. That all these forms of life adapt themselves to different zones depending on how much sunlight they need and what kind of water pressure they like and what water temperature they like and things like that. The same thing happens with energy, and the continuum of energy self-differentiates into 14 domains, and those domains behave like consciousnesses, and there are actually proper names for those domains that when you study the Dogon and the Egyptian and the Hindu and the Buddhist systems, you learn what those names are, the names for the different levels of consciousness. Samkhya says that there are routine attempts being made from non-material consciousness to material consciousnesses, trying to communicate knowledge and trying to induce certain actions. That we have a yuga cycle going on where energy is shifting back and forth the same way energy shifts during sleep. And at the deepest point of the cycle, non-material consciousness has perfect knowledge but no ability to take action. It's the equivalent of a person who has something called locked-in syndrome. Locked-in syndrome is where the body is still alive and functional, but outwardly it looks like you're brain dead. But in truth, the person might actually be perfectly conscious inside and able to think all their thoughts, but it has no way of communicating what they're thinking. Non-materiality at the peak of this cycle is that same way. And so it does what it can to try to enlist a compatriot. And the only compatriot it's got are the material consciousnesses. And so it tries to find people like me who, in fact, are sensitive to it. I didn't realize I was sensitive to it, and try to get us to do the things that it feels need to be done.
Yeah. Do you feel that you're almost like spiritually guided in your research? Because that's how
Well,
I feel like.
my wife worked for an insurance company, a dental insurance company, and at one point, they have standards of instruction for their employees, and 4 levels. The person who's doing the instruction has to rank their student on this scale of 4 things, and at the worst level, at the top level of instruction, the top ranking says this person is able to complete this task with no instruction. At the worst level of ranking, it says this person is able to complete the task with full instruction. Well, I feel like my work has been at that level 4, that lowest level, that I am able to complete the task with full instruction, and all the way along at the point where I've needed certain things, what I've needed has become available to me in the form that I needed it to be. There's just the
I like
idea that my entry point into these studies happened to be through, in retrospect, if I had been choosing where to start, the smart place to start is with the Dogon. The Dogon Society is an umbrella over all of the classic traditions I wanted to study. I had no idea of that when I started out. And that's true about all sorts of things I've done. If I wanted to, if in retrospect wanted to learn about Egyptian hieroglyphics, there's a particular word I should have started with. I didn't start with it, but I now understand I should have. A very simple word that if you understand how it's formulated, um, that's the key to all the how all the other words are formulated. Very easy to understand how they're put together, and you can't misunderstand what the person who wrote the word meant. Same thing with the Dogon language. It's a systematized language. If you know how the word was pronounced, you can extract from the pronunciation of the word what the original intended meaning of the word was. You can't mistake it.
Yeah, I think in Egyptian they have a word called hek au.
Right.
I think that's like the sound of the like the logos,
Right.
the
Right.
sound of the word, you know?
Right. And so the Egyptian hieroglyphs, every hieroglyph associates with one or more concepts. And so when you read the Egyptian hieroglyphic word, I'll give you an example. The word for week, like days of a week, is written with two glyphs, very simple word. It's a sun glyph, which is a circle with a dot in the middle of it. That can represent the concept of a day. And an upside down U, which is the Egyptian number 10. I looked at that word and I said, symbolically, this word says 10 days to me. And so I did some research and I discovered the ancient Egyptians had a 10-day week. I learned a fact, an objective fact, just by looking at the word about Egypt. Then it turns out the ancient Chinese culture also observed a 10-day week, and they formulated their word for week exactly the same way. The sun glyph, which was round originally, and their number 10. This
Well,
is a system of language that the Chinese and the Egyptians shared at one point.
you're really good at English, right? You're like in
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
you're
that was my degree in
I think
college.
I think they call it like the word that you used this morning, like betlos, the betlos.
Right.
The A and the I, do they I think they might call it a diphthong.
Right. Right. That's
Right.
right.
Can you explain to that what people what that's when you combine the two letters, right?
Right. Well, the
Like the
Dogon
A and the
language,
I in
the,
betlos.
the Dogon language is built on what I call root syllables, that every syllable is defined. And so the root syllables pertain to very basic concepts. And when they want to formulate a word to express a new idea, they mix and match those syllables together to express the more complicated idea. It
Yeah.
all rests on those same syllables. And those a lot of those syllables carry over into ancient Egyptian language. They carry forward into other languages. In Sanskrit, Rene Guénon, who's sort of the go-to metaphysical guy for Hinduism, says that Sanskrit has morphed over time to the point that certain words in Sanskrit, their modern meaning is exactly the opposite of what it had originally been when the word was originally formulated. But they've retained the correct phonetics of the words and the phonetics of the Dogon phonetics. So I can take a Sanskrit word and go to the Dogon language and interpret what the Sanskrit word originally meant based on what the Dogon say the syllables mean. Same thing with the Egyptians. So you have cross comparison on these words. I can take any one of these key cosmological words, start with what one of the cultures says they think it represents or what it means, and then test that against the other languages and the other cultures to say, okay, did they understand this symbol the same way? Did they understand this word the same way? And you sort of triangulate in on what the original meaning had to have been of that word. It's like Ogo and Aku. They both refer to the same kind of orb, but they're expressed phonetically a little differently. You just have to sort of tune your ear to the fact that there's been a change in the pronunciation.
Yeah, did the Dogon have their own version of the Ankh symbol?
Yes, they do actually, and this is a symbol that, as we're okay, this tradition at one point in the process, about midway through the process, um, there was an era of cosmological instruction and civilizing instruction that looks to me as if it happened on Orkney Island, which is north of Scotland.
Huh.
It's a very centrally located island. All the ocean currents automatically take boats to this little island. A
Is
very
that anywhere near Kalanish?
Yeah, yes, they were connected there. The Celtic were there. I one of the things I posted before I published in one of my books is a comparative image of a Celtic Druid priest as drawn by a modern artist in France based on descriptions, ancient descriptions of what he looked like. and a Dogon diviner priest who's a modern priest, and they're indistinguishable in the way they're attired and the accoutrements they're carrying and the way they um, present themselves. It's the same thing. You can see that Celtic priests are Dogon priests. There's an archaeologist on Orkney who lived on Orkney his entire life, and he researched a place called the Tomb of the Eagles. And he opens his book by saying the reader is going to be surprised to learn that Neolithic Orkney more closely resembled modern Africa than it does Scandinavia.
I believe it.
Yeah. And
I
so
believe it.
lots of things that the researchers on Orkney don't understand, I do, because all this stuff ties to the basically African-based system that I'm researching. It looks to me as if the first round of instruction happened around 9000 BC in the Fertile Crescent region, and that midway through the cycle, about the time the Hebrew calendar was established, and this instructional site was established on Orkney, that these teachers, who the Dogons say were originally non-material consciousnesses like the plasma we were talking about,
Yeah.
that they enlisted the Africans, the Dogon, who had done the best job of retaining this information in correct form. They enlisted them as sort of as student professors to be the interfaces between them and the new groups of students that came in. And then every time a class would graduate from this school, one or more of the Black African instructors would go with them and help establish a society. That's why you have all the priests and all the scribes, and likely all the earliest pharaohs in Egypt um, give the impression of having been absolutely Black African. I have a picture of
For sure, many of them were.
Jeffrey, who was one of the early dynasty priests in Egypt. There's a bust of him that is a perfect side by side comparison for a photograph I have of one of the Dogon priests,
I believe it.
down to wearing the same hat and the same expression on his face.
Yeah. I mean, and they also intermingled with a lot of the tribes, like the Hittites, the Mitanni,
Yeah, because
a lot of
they were all trained in the same place, and when they graduated, a handful of the priests went with them to help them set things up.
yeah, yeah. It's incredible. If you get into like the lore of Akhenaten's father, Amenhotep III,
Right.
they said that he was born by his parents, the mother being impregnated by a light.
Uh huh.
Mutemwa,
Well, that
Mutemwa.
probably derived from mythical statements or from names that were applied to him or so forth. A lot of these are figurative statements that when you get down into it, you realize are a restatement of some scientific principle. The
Yeah,
whole the Dogon retained better versions of some of these myths. The myth of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods is expressing a scientific dynamic of energy. It's called a resonance cascade. What happens with these two waves of energy as they interface with each other is their impulse is to seek out points of resonance.
hmm,
Resonance is where the wavelength of one of the energies is an even factor of the other energy. And when you reach those points of they're like notes on a musical scale. When at those points, all of the energetics simplify and the resistance minimizes. Light is able to be emitted, and all sorts of things happen. So when we try to observe a particle in the quantum domain, we end up disturbing those two energies. And when we disturb that, the natural impulse of the energies is to find a way to restore the resonance again. And that process is called a resonance cascade. And the actions that are involved in that are exactly what the Dogon ancestor who plays this role of Prometheus does in the myth. He's acting out the dynamic of a resonance cascade.
it's very interesting. It's incredible.
And it gets down to really serious scientific stuff. I mean, it goes so deeply that, okay, originally one of the cross checks I was doing on the science was, when I realized that I think this is the shape of an electron orbital, I would refer to Stephen Hawking and Brian Greene and people like that to come up with descriptions and diagrams that demonstrated that I was right about that. as time went on, the Dogon would say that a particular thing is true. And I thought, well, if this is true scientifically, somebody has to know it. I started having to dig into a whole set of books that were written by these 1920s and 30s top physicists. Some of them took the time to explain in layman's terms, as if they were talking to a 6-year-old, all about these scientific developments in physics and what they really meant and why this theory superseded that theory and why that this fact was discarded because of this other new fact and so on. And it has reached the point where, in order to verify that what the African tribes and the Egyptians are saying and the Hindus are saying and Buddhists are saying is actually scientifically true, I'm having to dig very deep in these scientific books of these top physicists to prove it. And oftentimes the way, like with the AIs, the way you ask a question determines what kind of answer you get. You ask it one way and they say, absolutely, there's no connection between these two things. Then you ask it a different way and they give you an example like they did with the serpent, where they tell me in specific terms, the dynamics of motion of a serpent are exactly the dynamics of those two oscillations of energy. And so that's why a serpent represents the energies.
It almost sounds like the Serpent Mound in Ohio.
Yeah, well, that's another factor. That serpent mound in Ohio is built to represent a series of progressive stages by which those two energies form something called beat frequencies. A beat frequency
Wow.
is hugely important. Okay, you'll know what a beat frequency is if you've ever driven your car on a highway and rolled down just one window.
Yeah.
You probably heard a whacka 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 sound.
Yeah.
Okay, what that comes from are beat frequencies. The beat frequencies represent energy that, in certain instances, is interfering with itself, so the sound gets quieter. And in other circumstances, they align with each other, and so they reinforce themselves, and the sound gets louder. And so it gets whacka, 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 louder, softer, louder, softer, louder, softer. Any energy does that. And that's the dynamic by which wave like energy self differentiates into quanta, discrete quanta, because those beat frequencies are shaped like the Egyptian mouth glyph. It's an almond shape. It's the Vesica Pisces.
The chat room wanted to know what is the hieroglyph that you wishes you started with.
Oh, I talked about the word already. The word for week is the one. It's called. The word is pronounced Met, M-E-T. And the reason I wish I'd started with is because it's such a simple word, and the meaning of the word is so obvious from the glyphs. Once you realize that that one word works that way, a thinking person has to ask, is it possible that every word works this way? And it turns out
Huh.
they all do. They all do. As a matter of fact, there are certain classes of Egyptian words that include a trailing glyph that doesn't get pronounced. The Egyptologists say it's there for emphasis because the glyph usually has some relationship to the word. But the real reason that trailing glyph is there is because the symbolic sentence that's being written that precedes it defines a meaning that's assigned to that glyph. And so now you can develop a whole list of the proper meanings of hundreds or thousands of Egyptian glyphs on the authority of the language itself, not based on some researcher's guess as to what the glyph
Yeah.
represented.
Yeah. It's ancient Egyptian is truly amazing. The more I look into it, I'm realizing how much divine knowledge they did actually have about the sun and even
Yeah.
maybe possibly bacterial genetics.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay, I was talking about the myth of the sleeping goddess who sleeps just below the surface of the water.
Yeah.
That's actually a biological dynamic. There's a woman named May Wan Ho who has written a number of books. She died recently, but she talks about dynamics of water in a human or in any living creature, that just inside of every aqueous membrane, every membrane that is friendly to water, hydrophilic membrane, a zone forms, naturally forms, and it's a zone called an exclusion zone. It's a place where the structure of water shifts and a lot of biological components are pushed away from the membrane at that point. But in fact, what's being created is a superconductive channel that becomes a reservoir within the creature for proton electron pairs, which are the fuel of chemical reactions in the living creature. And in most living creatures, there's no cell in the body that's more than a few microns away from one of those channels. Electrical impulses that pass through the channel reach the brain half a second quicker than the same signal transmitted through the nervous system.
So incredible.
This is a very important dynamic, and it's right there at the beginning of the book of Genesis.
Yeah. Yep. That's so true. Wow. That is amazing. Wow. That's amazing. And a lot of there's so many like goddesses of the waters that have to do with the light.
Right. They're all they all come off of one model. Okay. One of the things that happened, I was saying that classes of 8 students were instructed at a time. We go to the Scarborough village on Orkney Island. There are 8 living chambers there. This is dorm housing for the students. When the class graduated, they chose a name for themselves that declared a major subject of study, the same way you declare a major in college. Okay, so to give you some examples of what those are, on Orkney Island, the Scarborough village sits next to a bay that's called the Bay of Scale. The generic form of this naming convention is to combine an ancient Egyptian word Sakai, Skahai, with another syllable that is a cosmological syllable. So scale combines Sakai with the word El. It says celebrates El. Sakai means to celebrate. There's a
Wow.
tribal
That
group.
sounds like the sequels, like Sicily.
Yes, in the borderland between Tibet and China, there's a Black African priestly group called the Naki or the Naxi. That Ki or Xi is a bastardized form of Sakai, and Na is a consensus cosmological term that refers to the non-material feminine. So the declared subject of study for the Naki was the non-material feminine. In the area of Egypt in northern Africa, the Berbers were known as Amazighi. That's Amma Sakai. It says celebrates Amma. Amma is the mythological character in Dogon culture who most closely resembles a deity. Amma was the affectionate nickname that Ganesha gave his mother, who formed him out of clay.
Yeah. It sounds like the Japanese solar god. It's like Inanuzi and Azan. I forget the name. Inanuzi, Izanugi, and Azanugi. The two Japanese ones. It
Oh,
also
right.
sounds very similar to Anunnaki.
Right. Like the Kanjitan there.
Yeah.
Okay. In Judaism, the tribal name was Yahuda. That says praises light. Huda means to praise. Yah is the term for light. In Egypt, it was Mirah. Mir means loves, and Ra, as you know, is the sun god. These naming conventions play out again and again and again. You see a group that's named that way, and I immediately know they had to have been instructed in the same tradition. There are certain signatures that tip us off immediately that that's true. Any culture that imagines that there's a wheel or a chariot associated with the constellation Orion, the only place to have come up with that is through this instructor tradition, because you look at Orion and there's no evidence of a wheel or a chariot. Any culture whose primary unit of measure was a cubit was influenced by the same tradition. We know it without even starting, without knowing anything else about the culture. They measure with cubits. This culture comes out of the tradition I'm studying.
Do they associate that Ankh symbol with the sun? The
That
sun?
Ankh symbol actually, it was originally the symbol of the sleeping goddess.
Wow, that even makes more sense.
Okay, now all of the original houses, those chambers at the Scarborough village, all of the original ones that were built to a single plan that the researchers don't even talk about. To find out about it, I had to go to a children's book that was written by an author from Orcne who now lives not far from me in New York State, who documented it in his children's book. And I know what the plan of the house represents because the Dogons still preserve that plan. When they build a house out of stone, they build it using architectural features that are a match. But they say the reason they build this plan, okay, the Orcne researchers are saying they have no correlates to the plan. They understand what the plan is, but there's nothing in their region that compares to it. They don't know where it came from. The Dogon house is built to the plan because it represents the body of a sleeping woman or a sleeping goddess. There's a round room that represents her head. There are two side rooms that represent her arms. There's a central square room that represents her body cavity with a hearth in the middle of it that represents a heart. There's entry at the bottom that represents her sexual parts. This is a very clearly defined set of symbolism for the Dogon. So once I realized that the houses tied to the Dogon house plan,
Wow.
that opened up the door to analyze every other element on Orkney in terms of the Dogon cosmology and the Dogon symbolism, the Dogon and Egyptian words, and so forth. And so I was able to write a whole book called The Mystery of Skara, where
Got to get that.
all of these symbolic elements that nobody on Orkney is able to trace make complete sense when you examine them in terms of Egyptian and Dogon symbolism.
Laird, do you have Scottish?
Laird is a Scottish name, and I'm partly
Yeah.
Scottish. Yes, Laird. As a matter of fact, one of the trends in the symbolism is that I've moved along through my process with 15 books. The symbolism tends to move closer and closer and closer to me specifically. Why?
Oh,
I can't say.
that's
Um,
amazing.
the Skara village was discovered in the mid 1800s because a series of storms washed away the dirt that was covering up a corner of it.
Oh,
But it was on
interesting.
the land of a landowner in Orkney called the Laird of Scale.
Wow. Oh my God.
Yes. Okay.
That's kind
That image that you showed earlier of um, of the the Beitel.
yeah,
Okay, that image, as I said, is the logo of the college I went to.
that's
This is
incredible.
very specific layered symbolism. I was talking about nicknames. I joked, "What are you going to call me, La?" Well, there's a waitress at a restaurant we visit frequently, and her name is Elle. And I joked with her. I said, "Elle could be my nickname." This was before I'd tapped into this final symbolism that everything ties back to Elle.
It's the oldest name
Now,
forgotten.
actually, it doesn't really tie to Elle. It ties to Elle's consort, whose name was Asherah. And Asherah symbolism, okay, in the Near East, the name wasn't Asherah. It was Asar, which is the Egyptian word for Osiris.
Yeah, and it comes and that actually, yeah, Asar, and that comes right from Asura, the Vedic Asura tribes.
Right. So the
Yeah,
same phonetic roots.
yeah,
And
it's just the sound
the
shift.
symbolism of Asherah is overarching. It touches all the different geographies that I write about. Um, on Orkney Island, every year there's a ball game that they play on Christmas weekend. And there are certain rules to the game, and there are certain goals established for two teams of men or boys. They play it twice, once with grown men, once with teenage boys. And the goal is to get a ball that represents a decapitated head either into the sea or to a wall on opposite ends of this island.
That sounds Mayan or something like that almost.
Well, the Maori have an exactly matching game,
In
but
Hawaii, that's Hawaii, right?
no, yeah, that's
The Aboriginals of
New
Hawaii?
Zealand and
New
Australia,
Zealand, yeah,
and
that's right.
they're descended from it. They're Polynesian like the Hawaiians.
Yeah.
Okay, the same exact same game was played on Crete in the centuries following the Orkney era of instruction I'm talking about. Only
Wow.
it was played by women, following the same rules, with the goal being to get the ball into the ocean on one side. The exact same game was played for thousands of years at Abydos in Egypt. This was an Osiris game. Now, there are any number of architectural and symbolic geographical elements at Abydos that are honorific, specifically honorific of Orkney. One of the things is on Orkney, from where the standing stones of Sinis are, the standing stones of Sinis are the first megalithic stones in the United Kingdom, the earliest. From the site that they're on, you have a showcased view of an island across the waters with two mountains. and a gap in between the two mountains. Now, the reason that's important is because the way the geography works is you have two aspects of the sun going on. You have its motion from sunrise to sunset, and the sun sets behind those mountains. But you also have the view of the sun setting behind those mountains that oscillates with the seasons, moves from solstice to equinox. The equinox is right between the two mountains, and it shifts from north to south over the course of the seasons. That's those two motions of the sun are the two oscillations I was talking about that produce the beat
Wow.
frequencies. This is the absolute essential dynamic of those energies. And it was given visibility on a human scale on Orcne. Well, at Abydos, according to Om Seti, the word Abdu, which is the original name of Abydos, meant the desired mountain. And there's exactly that kind of a mountain there. There's a cemetery where all the high dignitaries were buried that's in direct view of those two mountains with a gap in between it.
The land of Manu.
And the sun actions, the sun dynamics worked exactly the same way with those mountains.
Yeah, they have an Egyptian symbol. I think it's called Akhet.
Yeah, the Akhet, that's
That's that
the
symbol, right?
gateway for the sun. Yeah, the
Yeah,
Akhet is, from my perspective, modeled after the Orkney Mountains.
that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
And
yeah.
there were two Akhets. There was a Western Akhet and an Eastern Akhet.
Yep.
The Eastern Akhet is the mountains at Abydos, and the Western Akhet is the Akhet on Orkney.
Wow.
Now, those orbs are called Aku orbs. They're called Aku orbs because they are the plasma energy that emerges from the Akhet.
Wow. Wow. Oh my God. We are kindred spirits, my friend.
Yeah. So this all gets down to the idea that
Can you adopt me, Laird?
these root energetics are the core of consciousness. If you want to get down into religious spirituality, based on what yoga says, based on what Samkhya says, based on what the entire Hindu tradition and Buddhism say, it looks as if when a person dies, there is a plasma energy inside them that emerges through the top of their skull
Yes.
that continues on as a plasma energy, a plasma consciousness. These orbs kept turning up. There was a researcher named John Burke who studied the energetic cairns and the pyramids and so
I have his
forth.
book, Stones of Plenty. Is it
Yes.
Stone? Yeah.
Okay. Now, in that book, the photographs he has in those books, one of the problems is that every time they would take a photograph inside these cairns, there would be nothing there. But when they developed the photograph, there was a picture of one of these orbs. One of the physicists that they knew explained to them the reason is because those orbs are always there, but they're there just below the level of energy that we can visualize, that we can see. That when you take a flash photograph, you impart just enough energy to them to make them momentarily visible. They appear on the photograph, then disappear. Now, John Burke was of the impression that the energetics of the orbs, that these orbs were incidental. They were a byproduct of the energetics of the cairn. And that the energetics of the cairn were what enhanced the fertility of agricultural seeds, which he saw as being the purpose of the cairns was people would bring their seeds into the
Yeah, and
cairns
dose them.
and leave the seeds there to enhance their fertility. When they would plant them, they would get better crop yields. And he conducted scientific experiments to demonstrate that was true, controlled studies. Here are the same seeds never entered the cairn, and here are the seeds that were put in the cairn. Look how much more productive the ones that from the cairn are.
Yeah. It's interesting. Those cairns are like tumuluses where there's
Right,
just a hole on the top. And if you make it out of granite,
right.
granite makes low levels of radiation.
Do
So
you
if
know
you
why there's a hole on top?
yeah,
The reason there's a hole on top is because those cairns are symbolic of a beat frequency. And
wow.
what happens to energy when you disturb it in a particle, when you disturb it inside one of those beat frequencies, is the resonance cascade I was talking about. And
Yeah.
its result, its dynamic is to take that particle that was originally centered in the waves and shift it to the top of the wave.
Wow.
A Tibetan stupa illustrates through its
Yeah.
architecture that the
Yeah.
same thing happens with these cairns like Maze How Cairn on Orkney has an inexplicable opening at the top of the cairn, which it shouldn't have because nobody could ever use that. There was no way to actually enter the cairn from there that was workable, but they still had to have the opening at the top. The reason was because this is symbolism. They have to do things a particular way to represent the science.
Yeah, it's very similar to even like a plasma cone that they form like with neutron star, you know what, to accelerate the
Right,
light.
right.
Yeah,
Very similar to a black hole.
yeah.
As a matter of fact, that picture you showed of the Betel is the shape of the um, event horizon of a black hole.
Wow.
Stephen Hawking includes a diagram in his book, the let's see, what's it called? Um, Something of time. I have to. It's the first book he published. He has a picture of the event horizon of a black hole, and it's exactly that.
Yeah, that's incredible. You know, there's even like if you go into like Dante Alighieri and a lot
Yes,
of the symbolisms that they, I mean, a lot of it looks like supernova explosions, and
right,
even like a lot of times when they show angels as rings of angels around the earth. I mean, that's how auroras form around the
right.
crowns of the earth. You know,
Okay,
shimmering
okay.
light.
The one of the root forms that energy takes is the shape of the sun glyph. That's what a hydrogen atom's geometry is. It's a center with energy that's spinning around it.
Wow.
Okay, now that center point is sometimes referred to as a head. In the myths of Ganesha, the origin myths of Ganesha, and I wrote an entire book about Ganesha's scientific symbolism. Um, Ganesha's symbolism is to the dynamics of energy that begin with that spinning energy. But in the origin myth of Ganesha, his original head is cut off and replaced with the head of an elephant.
Yeah.
Well, that original head is the center point of that spinning energy. The replacement head is what you get when you graph what's called the moment of inertia of energy as it materializes. If you graph the mathematical values of that moment of inertia, it creates a shape that looks for all the world like the shape of a head of an elephant.
Wow. That's incredible. Did you get into some of the weapons that they wield, like Ganesha, along with Varuna? They wield the Pasha, the loop.
Yeah. Well, that loop is important because the fundamental dynamic of energy that underlies these oscillations, or actually what the oscillations produce as its fundamental consequence, is looping energy. A beat
It's like,
frequency is essentially looping energy.
yeah, and this is what happens with coronal mass ejections with
Right,
twisted
exactly.
magnetic
Exactly
field.
the same thing.
Yeah,
And so that loop is important because looping energy is a key dynamic.
that's incredible. That's incredible. It's really amazing that the ancient past had more advanced knowledge than we do today because we tend to separate them. And in the ancient past, an adept was a doctor and a shaman, a scientist and a warrior.
Right.
They were all
Okay.
these.
You know the story of Osiris, which is about these same energetics. I've already said Asherah, who represents the beat frequency, is Osiris. What happens to Osiris is his body, he's tricked into being killed, and his body is dismembered into 14 segments. Those 14 segments are the 14 domains I talked about, that continuum of energy that Asherah represents being itself divided up into the 14 segments. But then what happens is his wife Isis finds a way to reconstitute those segments together and reanimate, reconstruct Osiris.
From
I
finding the
mean,
phallus, right? She finds his phallus.
right, yeah, right. I mean, I think the phallus is the one piece that is missing, but she was able to reconstitute him and put him back together as he had originally been. Now, the dynamic of consciousness, way I've always described it is the ability to take a concept, break it down mentally into its component pieces, and then mentally reassemble it back together again. That's the dynamic of Osiris. They're talking about the same energies. These are the energies of consciousness.
Wow.
That's what's going on. And this all comes down to the same dynamics of energy playing out.
Wow, it's so amazing, Laird. I really appreciate you sharing this knowledge with us today.
Well,
It,
this knowledge, I look at this knowledge the same way that I look at if I'm walking along outside in the woods on a path and I notice a seed lying on the path, my birthright expectation is that I should be able to pick up that seed, bury it and water it and nourish it and have it grow into a plant. No one should be able to um, monetize that. That's a fundamental right of every human being, is to be able to plant a seed and see it grow. And this knowledge falls in that same category for me, that this is the property of humanity, not the property of any person. You can't be proprietary about it. As soon as you start being proprietary about it, you lose your connection to it. It's not proprietary information. This is global information. I
I agree.
spent a great deal of time early on in my process pondering the question, what right do I have to write about topics of discussion that were scrupulously kept secret for thousands and thousands of years? What right do I have to talk about this stuff publicly? And I realized that the only reason for laying out all this science was as a benefit to us. And the science, as it sat at the point when I started reading, I evaluated it was only about 50 years ahead of where our science was. So if it was going to have any benefit at all for humanity, we had to talk about it now. We can't wait.
I agree. I agree. Have you ever read any of Theosophy and people that came from the Theosophy movement?
Yeah.
Because you
Yeah,
have,
some. I mean, and some of it I agree with, and some of it I don't. There's a great deal of overlap into the things I talk about, but there's a lot of it that's imagined too. Um, Richard Feynman said the first imperative is not to fool ourselves,
no,
and we are the very easiest person to fool.
that's true. That's true.
So the mind is wired to see patterns even where they don't necessarily exist. And sometimes those are meaningful patterns, and sometimes they're chasing off after unicorns. When a child lies on the grass and looks up at the sky, at the clouds, they imagine animal shapes.
Yeah,
The animal shapes aren't really objectively there, but they imagine them anyway. Well, a lot of the researchers in our field of study do that. They think that if, from a modern perspective, I can overlay geometry on this thing, it must be real, it
yeah,
must be genuine.
yeah.
But I say, if you can't point to an ancient society that expressly indicated that's what they thought, you don't have anything. Interpretations have to begin with an ancient statement, and then you need to anchor it. You need to demonstrate that other ancient societies saw it exactly the same way.
I agree 100%. That's exactly how I work. That's
Right,
exactly how I work.
right.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. I would really love for you to come back on at some point if you'd like
Oh,
to.
I'd be happy to come back on at whatever point you like. I've enjoyed it too. It's a pleasure to talk to a person who has as good an overview of these concepts as you've got.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You have studied a wide range of subjects and you are on top of what they're about.
Thank you so much. It's life experience. I might look young. I'm 47, right? But I've had a lot of different life experience. I went through a lot of trauma and stuff as a young kid, and I kind of found studying and alternative healing
Right.
combined as a way to deal with my trauma. So I read a lot. I
Right. Oh, that's a
played
smart way to
music.
go about it. A great way to heal yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I spent some time in like a group home as a teen and things like that. So I found escape through my music and through reading and things
Yep.
like that. And I found my way out of it in some sane way.
Well, and I advise you don't be afraid to write. If there's a subject you know about, and I came into this thinking, well, surely all of these subjects have been researched to death down to the bottom. But what I found out was when you start tracing how do they know such and such, why do they think such and such, you realize it's all based on presumption and assumption, and nobody ever bothered to really trace it down to the bottom. And
So
so
true.
there's all sorts of room for exploration of ideas that other people haven't pursued, and often begins with resemblances. You have to be careful about them. As I said, you have to be able to anchor the resemblance, but that's a good place to start. Is that looks to me like This thing is the same thing as that thing. Chase it and write about it.
Oh, you gave me some inspiration today. I really appreciate those words because I've been working on a book and I changed it so much over the last few years because I want it to be like I want it to be a certain way and I've been evolving. Certain
Right.
things I thought 5 years ago I don't know long I don't think
Right.
anymore.
Right. But the thing is that is a slippery slope because like I've been trying to finish up my 15th manuscript for months now. The
Yeah.
problem is I'm learning so much so fast, and a lot of it pertains to the subject of the book I'm writing. And I want to, so I've written a couple of extra chapters, and just trying to draw a line and say, okay, at some point you have to say, this is what I know to this point. I'm going to publish this much, and
Yeah.
then I'll follow on with something else later.
Yeah, well, I changed it a little bit because I started to write on like a long book, and then I'm realizing, wow, each one of these chapters is a little book in itself.
Yeah, that's right. If you wanted to pursue it, you could be.
Yeah, so
Um,
that's why I'm trying to
I'm
break it down like that.
One of the concepts I'm writing about is about covalent bonds.
Wow.
Okay, but in but that hold atoms together into molecules. Um, there are
And the symbolism in like the
Oh
cult
yeah,
like
the
uh
covalent bond is the exact same dynamic of energy. It's one of those little beat frequencies that holds the two electrons together.
wow.
It's all the same stuff. There are only two structures that are forming all the way up the scale. There's the circular energy that spins around a center, which is a form of a beat frequency, and there's the almond-shaped beat frequency, which is the same dynamics of energy in motion.
Wow. Like the Eye of Ra.
Yeah. So when you're looking at a hydrogen atom, all of those um, stable orbits for the electron as you move. There are like 3 to 5 levels of stable orbiting for the electron in a hydrogen atom. Those are all proto beat frequencies. They're the same dynamics as a beat frequency.
Have you ever seen before I let you go, have you ever seen do you know what the bacteriophage is?
Yeah, sure.
Have you ever seen that structure what they look in any Dogon symbolism?
No, so far, but I haven't really been looking for it. My focus on the biological aspect of things was really just for one book. I wrote a book called The Waters of Life. And so I haven't really dug as deeply as I ultimately could into all the subjects relating to biology and to consciousness in particular, but I know they come out of the same
Yeah.
energetics.
Yeah, that would be great. Well, I'm really looking forward to reading some of your books. I really appreciate you coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor to speak with you.
Well, thank you. I recommend that if you're gonna start, the most comprehensive view of what's going on is in the last two books and the third one I'm writing right now. The last two are called Amma and the Spark of the Universe and The Waters of Life.
Oh, those sound perfect. Yeah, I like the Waters of Life, especially. I love that sound. I love that the sound of that. It's right up my alley.
Well,
Everybody, this is Laird Scranton. This has been the Space Water Podcast. Really appreciate this. What a great show this has been. Definitely one you got to re-listen to, everybody out there. Thank you in the chat room for all your support. Once again, it's Laird Scranton, the Space Water Podcast. My name